wow, wow.
Bam.
Welcome to the Local Pickup. I'm Jason Broadwater.
I'm Chris Gervais.
So we're going to talk about the SG. Now Chris is holding a Gibson SG Standard.
That I love.
This is the legit SG, the real deal, right?
LSG.
It'll take you for a ride.
Oh.
Like on 95.7, The Ride. So anyway, Gibson makes, of course, the Les Paul that everybody knows, and they make the SG, which is just about as famous as the Les Paul. And it's funny, the SG is like a symbol of just rock and roll, man. I mean, you got the devil horn kind of shape, that you've got super fast neck. You have great access to the high-end frets. You can see that they push the fretboard out so that the end of the fretboard is right at the end of the body. So you've got full access to the whole.
If you want to spend your evening performing up here,
way up here. Yeah. So here's how it came about. Gibson made the Gibson Les Paul. It was their first solid body electric guitar, and it was done with Les Paul, the jazz guitarist Les Paul. And they put it out, and it was a big deal, and it was in response to Leo Fender's Telecaster and Stratocaster and all that. Well, 58, 59, 60, they had the Gibson Les Paul, the gold top. A lot of people see those gold top Les Pauls. They're like $100,000, to find a 58 gold top Les Paul and all that stuff. Well, the sales started out great because what Gibson did was they made a nicer guitar versus Fender's guitars. They made nicer bridge, nicer woods, nicer just everything. And it was a higher end guitar. But then sales started tanking because all these Fenders were just cheaper, and they were doing the same thing in terms of being an electric guitar that you could play loud and rock and roll with. And all these other companies started coming out with electric guitars, solid body electric guitars. Now there'd been electric guitars before that. There were arch top electric guitars, but the solid bodies, they were coming out in droves in the 50s, right? So Gibson's sales started to tank on the Les Paul. So without Les Paul's permission, they changed the Les Paul. And they changed it to look like that. They did a double cutaway, which created the devil horn thing. They made a really thin profile neck. They pushed the fretboard out so you get access to all the frets.
I would never guess at that time and place in history that this is the design they would come up with.
Yeah.
It's so super cool, but
it is.
There's nothing about that time that says this is what you designed.
It looks like it's 70s, 80s.
And you associate it with like AC/DC and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially
Black Sabbath,
AC/DC, Black Sabbath. Yeah, Iommi, what's his name?
Although another funny story is funny about my childhood misunderstanding. I saw the name written in a guitar magazine somewhere, and I guess the font or whatever, I decided it was Tony Iommi.
Yeah.
So, again, I would talk to my friends about
Tony
the
Iommi.
guitarist from Black Sabbath. Tony Iommi.
What is it, Iommi?
Iommi,
It's a capital I on the beginning.
Tony Iommi.
Yeah. That's funny. So this guitar, and you see the ones from the 60s, it's like 61 through, 63 or something, and it says Les Paul on it up there. And it is the Les Paul.
It's crazy.
And it looks like that. And so SG stood for solid guitar.
Solid.
Yeah, solid, dude. And Gibson, Les Paul did not like it at all. He didn't like the look.
He that man had a lot of sass. Like if he didn't like something, apparently, as I'm learning, he was like,
He told him, he's like, take my name off of it, I don't like it. He didn't like the look, and he didn't like the slim tapered neck. They advertised it as the fastest neck in the world.
What? It's really?
Yeah. Because they made it.
The neck. That's an interesting thing. You'll hear guitar players will say that. Like it's a fast neck.
Yeah.
And if you don't play guitar, you're pretty confused by that.
And what that means, of course, is a couple things. First of all is the action, which is the distance of the strings to the neck. So it's how easy it is to press down. So good low action is super easy to touch and press down. It's also the neck. If the neck's chunky, it's not really fast. It feels good.
Yeah.
It's like a baseball bat. But the slim neck just made it real easy to slide up and down.
Yeah.
So they made these, and they were the fastest neck in the world and all that. But they would break. The neck would break, the headstock would break.
And which I think you should say, even if you aren't like a shredder and this speed guitar player, I mean, the truth is, like, the thinner the neck is, the easier guitar is to play.
It feels simple
You're
and
gonna have
nice.
more freedom and comfort.
And it's not necessarily that you like it better. I mean, I love this. We did an episode on that Epiphone. It's got a nice chunky neck, and it feels fantastic. But it just feels good to play a slim tapered neck. He didn't like it. He wants his name off of it. In like 63 or whatever it is, they take his name off of it, and they just leave the SG there. It was like Les Paul solid guitar, and they just left the SG, and it was just called solid guitar. And they continued to make the SG and didn't really know what to name it or this, that, and the other, and people still called it a Les Paul. But then they reissued the traditional Les Paul that we all know of a Les Paul in like 68 or something. And then they kept making this because people fell in love with it. And they just called it the SG. They never renamed it. And it's been known as the SG ever since. They've made a bunch of different versions of it through the years, some with thicker necks, thinner necks. They tried to thicken the neck so it wouldn't break and stuff. But it's kept the same, you know, the kind of devil horns, the pushed out fretboard, pushed out neck, the fast neck, and it's just been a symbol of just rock and roll. It's become a symbol of just, I mean, with AC/DC, just rock, party rock.
Yeah.
You know, and him, like, there's this great, what's the AC/DC guy's name? The guitar,
Malcolm
Angus Young.
Malcolm is the other guy. Angus
Okay,
Young.
yeah, Angus Young. Yeah, there's this great video I saw where he comes off stage and he gets on this guy's shoulders, and the guy walks into the crowd, and he's just going, you know, like he's just soloing the whole time, and it just embodies what that guitar is all about.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's definitely, it's one of those guitars that some guitars have like their thing that they do specifically, and it's this kind of niche thing. But with SGs, it's definitely it's cropped up in a lot of different little circles that are completely unrelated genre-wise as the guitar. Like I've told Jason this many times. It was, I first got into guitars when I was a teenager, and Les Paul, I just wasn't ever like a Strat guy. I just wasn't. And I definitely always thought, I instantly thought Les Pauls were the coolest guitars in the world. And I never owned one, and I played a friend's, and I instantly realized just the way that I played just didn't fit with the Les Paul. I was hitting the switch a lot. It just wasn't, it's heavy, hurt my back.
Yeah.
And then the first time I picked up an SG, I was like, it felt like home instantly. The first time I played it, because I do love the way that, and this is just for me, this is not, I mean, this isn't even about what I think is better or worse, just when I hold an SG, it feels like home to me, because just the way the bridge is, and the just the way it feels.
Good, like,
yeah, because I do that so much and stuff, and I came up in the sort of like third wave Midwest emo trend, and the SG was a standard guitar back then when I was like, you know, a young kid and like learning about music and stuff, and I completely associated it with that. Yeah. And it seemed like such a cool guitar to me for that reason.
Well, where the SG changed for me is I used to think it was AC/DC, and I wasn't a fan. I am now, but I wasn't a fan of AC/DC then. But when Fugazi came out.
Yeah, and I think they're probably responsible for what, by the late 90s, was doing that.
I mean, Ian played that SG, and Guy played a Rickenbacker. And it was just the perfect combination, because the SG was heavy, and the Rickenbacker was loud and crisp and high end, and it just, the two of them sounded so good together.
Yeah, definitely.
You know? So that is the Gibson SG. This is a 2009 model. I like the black on black. I actually call this guitar the Devil's Mistress, but I love the black on black. The traditional one is the cherry red. It looks more like this.
The standard idea.
Yeah, it's like what everybody thinks of when they think of the SG. And so
this makes me think about Black Sabbath because it's black.
Yeah, well, there you go. Lomi.
Tony, it makes me think about Tony Lomi. Should paint Tony Lomi's picture on here.
And so people started copying the SG like crazy, right? Every guitar maker that was making a guitar, they copy Strats, they copy Les Pauls, and they copy SGs. And people even refer to it as like, oh, that's an SG when it's not an SG. Like this. You would look at this guitar and say,
oh, right, we just call it an SG.
We just call it an SG. Yeah. But this was made by Kay, which is a big American guitar maker. It was made in Japan, and it was made in the late 60s. Now, what Japanese, we've talked about Japanese guitars in the 60s. In the early 60s, Japanese guitars were completely unique. They didn't look like American guitars at all. And that was Japanese guitar makers making their own style of guitars. Well, by the 70s, those manufacturers were figuring out the way they could make tons of money was just by making copies of American guitars. And they got so good in the 70s at doing that it's called the lawsuit era, where the guitars were like basically identical to the American guitars, and they were rip-offs. You know, they weren't sanctioned or licensed, and they would have a different name, but they would be freaking identical. You know, and so all these lawsuits came out and all this stuff. Ibanez was caught up in all that stuff, I think. But anyway, this is in the in-between mode, where notice it's not an exact copy of that. It's like almost cooler looking.
It's got a super rounded, it almost comes to this like almost a circular.
Yeah, and like the pickups they don't look like your Gibson humbuckers. They look like the old Japanese guitars. So this guitar is in that middle period where they're starting to imitate American guitars, but they still are using all the leftover like Japanese parts that they've been manufacturing. And so they made it out of like what they had laying around, but they cut the body to look like an SG. And so it's just one of the coolest looking guitars that you can find, man, because it's just like in that middle state. But it doesn't play like that guitar, not by a long shot.
Really
Yeah, let me plug this one in if I can. You know, I mean, that guitar is a first-class guitar that plays like insanely well. This guitar plays fine. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't. It's got a great sound.
Beefy.
It's beefy, man. And this thing is like pretty hard to push down. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, but it lets you do that. It's a specific thing it lets you do because of that resistance.
Yeah. So I mean, it's cool as it can be. I'm not down on it, and it's a great guitar to have and own and play. But it feels like a guitar that's worth hundreds of dollars versus a guitar that's worth thousands of dollars. You know what I mean? Just because it doesn't play like a finely tuned instrument. It plays like an indie rock banger guitar. You know what I mean? And you can feel the difference in every aspect of it. The neck, the the tremolo is not smooth like a nice upscale tremolo. It's like hard to do, you know what I mean? But it's cool like that, you know? So for a good indie band or something, man, it's like a perfect cool guitar. So, but yeah, I'm a big fan of Japanese guitars, and like I said, the early 60s, they were completely unique. The late 60s, they started to be this blend of rip-offs, still unique. And then in the 70s, they were basically just copies.
Yeah.
And then from then on, through the 80s, they were just copies of everything American. So, to me, I think Gibson created their second jewel of a solid guitar when they created this. Too bad Les didn't like it. Actually, it's good that Les didn't like it because they would have never gone back to remaking.
Yeah, they just
Les
have
Paul.
these two, and they've successfully had this second level. Like I definitely feel like Gibson's like Les Paul is the.
It is. It's their flagship guitar. Yeah.
But they definitely successfully have. Maybe this is inaccurate, but growing up and learning about them and sort of the cultural piece of guitars, it to me was like Fender had like the Stratocaster and then the Telecaster.
Right.
And then Gibson was like the Les Paul and the SG.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even though the time frames aren't the same, it just they're sort of first and second that
Absolutely.
you see the most of, I guess.
Yeah, and it's if you're just going on money, you would say the Les Paul's a nicer guitar. And the reason why it's more expensive, of course, might be because they've decided to make it that way. But if you look at the details, I mean, like a Les Paul has a maple body and a mahogany body and a flame maple top and all this extra stuff going on. The SG, one piece of wood, very simple, set neck. Got those great humbucker pickups on it, the Gibson humbuckers, you know.
I think that's part of why for me it, like I said, felt like home because I tend to want like a simple instrument. I don't.
Yeah.
When I play a show, I very rarely have ever used more than a tuner. I mean, I just go play through my amp. I'm not a pedal board guy.
Yeah.
I love the idea of being able to get on stage and just play and not have to worry about. I'm like there's too much energy and craziness going on for me to worry about pedals.
Yeah, right.
But that's just the way I play, I'm not saying right or wrong.
Everybody's different, yeah. And people do different things with SGs. They're versatile guitars, you know. People will play like blues and stuff, jazzy stuff with them. You know, you meet people that love SGs freaking love SGs.
Yeah.
It's like their main favorite thing. And they're light, they're fast, they're easy. You know, it's a great guitar. Absolutely great guitar. So Gibson did it right again, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then, Kay made some cool guitars. Great guitars came out of Japan. If you're a kind of a indie guy, girl, and you want something that you don't see much, getting some of these mid-'60s, late 60s Japanese guitars are the way to go. I mean, you see one and you're like, what is that? That is super cool. So that's what this is all about. And it's beefy, like it's it's not, you clean it up, it sounds okay, jazzy, but it really sounds good when you put the fuzz on it.
Yeah. A weird thing with SGs that it's the only guitar I can think of that like this is it is nice and like lightweight, but the headstock is still kind of heavy, so it's like anyone that plays an SG gets used to the like if you don't hold it, it's immediately is doing this.
So when you have a strap on and you let go of it, it starts doing that. Yeah. This doesn't do that. This body's very heavy compared. It's just made out of a different wood.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think it's all about like the body's heavy. Like
Yeah.
This has like apparently more weight.
Yeah,
on
and
that
there's
side.
this theory of like tone freaks on the internet that think that
Tone freaks.
yeah, and I don't say that in a negative way. People that are like all about talking about tone and stuff, that are all about light guitars and how light guitars have a better tone, it can resonate better. And then there are people who are the opposite, like heavy guitars have better sustain. It's like this constant debate.
Yeah, and
you
they
know?
have physical battles. They meet in parks.
They do. They fight. Yeah, with
They
sharp
beat each other with
objects.
guitars.
With guitars.
And
yeah.
then heavier guitar people win generally.
Yeah, right. Well, the devil horns come in handy.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, that is the story of the SG and a little bit on the late 60s K ripoffs of the SG. So see you guys next time on the Local Pickup.